Welcome everyone to another episode of Finding Freedom Through Confidence. Today we are in the second part of the series, Manager Efficiency, and we're going to be talking about the law of consistency. And so, for those of you who don't know who I am Tanique Easy, leadership development experts, helping to unlock the efficiency of managers, that is first time and mid level managers, so they become more proficient at producing results without burnout. I want to let me know where you are joining from. Where are you watching us from this afternoon? And if you are live, type the word hashtag live. And if you're watching the replay, type hashtag replay because we do come back and we talk to those persons who are in the comments section, whether you are live or you are on the replay. We come back and we, boost those comments. And so for us this year, our thought for 2026 is MVP confidence is currency. So we are, as I said, continuing our three-part series, Manager Efficiency. Last week, we talked about the law of decision in manager efficiency. And today we are at part two, the law of consistency, building culture through unified standards. And so here's the thing. Organizational culture doesn't organizational culture is actually a strategic asset. But here's something that is not talked about regularly, it's not mentioned very often. It is that organization culture rarely is destroyed in a single catastrophic event. Instead, culture is either meticulously protected or it is slowly eroded, by the weight of daily leadership choices. And so culture doesn't break in big moments. It actually breaks in those small moments where exceptions keep happening. And so let me see who is joining us here. Hi, Curtis. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Hashtag live. Hello, Curtis. Good to have you this morning, this afternoon, rather, with us. So let's consider this scenario. You may find it a common one, but let's consider this scenario where you have one supervisor enforcing a professional standard while another supervisor is bending that professional standard to be seen as flexible. And so in that moment, what is happening is that your staff, they aren't just confused. They are being actively trained to shop for the easiest answer. And so this inconsistency transforms your culture into a series of negotiations rather than a shared standard of excellence. And so this invisible tax you are paying every single day. And so today we are going to stop that drain. And so my promise for this session is that you will learn how to build consistency across your leadership team so that standards stop being a source of wasted time and energy. And we're going to see how we can move your managers away from, the friction of messy performance and towards operational stability that actually builds a culture that is not catastrophic, but actually builds a culture that doesn't cost you inconsistency, but one that creates high consistency and efficiency. So let's identify the cost. We want to identify, the cost of high inconsistency in standards. And so we're going to go back to, that scenario every now and then in the session. And so let's look at it this way. You have the first manager, the first supervisor, the first leader who is seeking to enforce the standard. And then you have that other supervisor who is, trying to be flexible and to give leniency over time. And this doesn't just happen as a one-off. It is something that keeps on happening. And so when we're trying to identify the high cost of inconsistent standard, here's the thing: uniform enforcement is not a managerial preference. So when we talk about uniform enforcement, we're talking about the enforcement of consistent standards, right? It is not a managerial preference. It's actually a strategic necessity. And so when standards are applied inconsistently, it actually acts as a tax on your operational efficiency. So it taxes that system. So not only is it impacting the bottom line, but it's impacting the managers and the teams themselves. And so this create what we call a messy performance, where decision flow becomes stalled, and every action becomes expensive both in time and in focus. And so to see this in action, let's look at two micro case. We're going to look at a micro case study involving, as we said, a common scenario that we shared earlier. You have the assistant manager. For example, you have an assistant manager and you have a senior supervisor. So the senior supervisor reports up into the assistant manager, and the assistant manager reports up to the director of human resources. Now you have the assistant manager who, is a little bit more strict, is a little bit more by the books, upholding the brand standards. And then you have the assistant or the senior supervisor, because that person is, let us say, the person is tenured, right? They have been there for 10, 15 years. So they have a different kind of rapport with the team members, for those who have been there long enough. And so what happens is, here comes the assistant manager upholding the standards, and say, for example, they reprimand, a staff member for chewing gum because it doesn't look professional. Sometimes you go into business places and you see the service representative, they are chewing gum, they're eating, and while they're having that conversation with you, that's not a good professional look. That's not a good look to uphold your brand. And so that is where the assistant manager now reprimands, not in front of the customer, but reprimands these staff members for these infractions. However, we now have the senior supervisor who has been there for years, upon top of years. And so, that senior supervisor is the one who is actually giving the staff members the gums to chew while they are on the front line facing customers. And so she sees this as being flexible. But and as being kind. So she's seen, I'm flexible and I'm kind. But while she thinks that this is building a rapport, she's actually creating a leadership breakdown. Do you see that? Because flexibility without alignment isn't kindness, it is actually confusion. And so this is where it now breaks down the leadership divide, where you have one person upholding a standard and the next one trying to be flexible, and they are lowering the standard. And so this is where the tax comes in, where now employees are like, okay, who do I listen to more? Because they're going to want to gravitate towards the person who is seen as more flexible or more kind or lenient, because they know that they can not uphold the standard and they can get away with certain things. While the person who is seen as strict is the one who, like, we're not going to listen to this person. And so that is where we can see the trap coming in. And so let us see how does this impact. So I'm going to share 3 primary impacts this inconsistency has on an organization. And so the first thing is that training staff, what is happening is that you're training the staff to bypass the rules, right? So we call it they're shopping for an easier answer. So they're training to bypass the rules. So when managers send conflicting signals, staff gravitate towards the path of least resistance. Like all of us, many of us would want to gravitate towards the path of least resistance because we don't want to do the hard things because it is a little bit more challenging if we say it, but you know doing it over time it becomes easier, but enforcing it initially it seems as if it is hard, but we're going to show how the mindset can shift to accommodate that. And so they learn to shop for the easiest supervisor, which completely undermines the authority of any leader attempting to uphold the brand's integrity. So now there's where it's going to go downhill because when other if another supervisor comes on and they're not flexible like this other supervisor, right? This is where again the breakdown comes in because you're going to start looking at, okay, I don't like this person because they are not like the first supervisor and they are not giving us any leeway. And so again, we would train the staff members now, or we train our team members to start bypassing the rules, to start looking for the easier way out. And so that is how it impacts. That is the first way on how it impacts, this inconsistency impacts an organization. The second way that it impacts the organization is through the efficiency drain, right? Where inconsistency becomes this major energy leak, where it forces managers to be constantly revisiting rules that should be settled, which, it's like you're having these extra conversations. You're having these extra conversations and it is causing extra conflict. And this actually drains the energy of the leaders that they could have actually been otherwise be using to talk about or to lead in high level results, to produce higher level results, instead of they are going back to these conversations on a regular basis. Like, how do we move past that? That is where the efficiency drain comes in. And then the third thing is that we have the financial and performance cost, because it's going to cost both financial and performance. So not only is it training your staff to bypass rules, not only is it draining the efficiency of your leaders and eventually your team members, but also it has a financial and performance implication. And so this isn't just a people problem. It is actually a bottom line problem. And here's where it comes in, where there's a research that was done by McKinsey that says that most executives feel the time they spend on decision is poorly utilized. And I believe that report shows about 60% of executives who said that their times making decisions, because of these invisible tax on the team, because of these inconsistency within the leadership dynamics of first time and mid-level managers. This is what is happening, and they are using up their time because things are now escalating up to them, and now they're using their time in such a way that they don't feel like it is utilized in an efficient manner. And so when standards are inconsistent, what happens is that projects get moved through the system slower. And the truth of the matter is customers are served less efficiently because we have to take people from the front line. We have to keep talking to them while they could have been using that time to serve customers more efficiently and effectively. And the managers could have been using their time for more efficient and effective building of the team. solving more complex problems. And so I want us to ask ourselves, which is more visible in your organization right now? Is it the extra conflict between your managers, or the staff shopping for, easy answers? So which is it that is showing up more? Which is more visible within your organization right now? The extra conflict between, your mid-level managers, your first-time managers, or your staff shopping for the easier answers. So you can drop that in the comments, or you can just write it down on your sheet of paper that you have taken notes right now. You don't have to share it if you don't want to, but just ask yourself and think about it. So now let's visualize the standards. We're going to look at this from a guardrail kind of perspective. So let's look on it like we are on this road, this windy road. And so, we have a windy road and we have guardrails, and then we have a part of the road where there's no guardrails. So if we have a road where there are guardrails, we'll go a little faster. But if there are no guardrails, we become more cautious and we slow down, and because we don't know what's going to happen. And so let's think about this. So to internalize this, the gravity of these small exceptions, let's visualize, as I was saying, visualize the guardrails of your organization. So you have guardrails and you have suggestions. So imagine a windy road. You're winding along a steep road, a steep cliff, a road with, solid, consistent guardrails. So you have that solid, consistent guardrail going up. And so it allows you as the driver to move with a little bit more confidence and a little bit more normal speed, because there are boundaries. You see the guardrails, they are in place, they are clear, they are visible. And to some extent, these guardrails are immovable unless you knock them out. And so these are your consistent standards. So we're visualizing that these standards, you are going up this windy road and you have these guardrails. So think about your organization as that road. And you are driving along that stretch of road. Your standards, because they are in place, they're not just on your mission statement, but they are being lived every single day. They are being acted upon on a daily basis. They are clear, they are visible, they are immovable, so to speak. You move with more confidence, you move with more clarity, you move with more consistency because you have those guardrails. You see them, they are operational, they are clear and visible. But now let's imagine you have the road, there are no guardrails, or they are optional. You see some right here, then the further up you go, you see none. And then as you continue along the stretch, intermittently you see these guardrails. And so how do you drive? You drive more cautiously on that road, because you're going to slow down. You're going to second guess. So what is happening is that on that road, as a driver, you're going to slow down. You're going to second guess every turn because you're not sure if there's a guardrail around there. And so you're going to operate more in a state of anxiety, in a more constant state of anxiety than in a state of confidence and boundaries and normal and clarity, because you're not sure. So without these firm boundaries, a standard is no longer a rule. What it becomes is a suggestion. So it's no longer, so because you no longer have that. And so when your standards become a suggestion, leadership actually becomes heavier. It becomes more exhausting. And not just for the person leading, but for everyone involved. And so to fix the road and lighten the load, we need to have specific mechanisms to prevent, this kind of leadership breakdown. And so how do we how do we have these clear standards to increase operational speed? How do we do that? Well, here's the tool that we can suggest. And this is where now we talk about, a tool that we can help the managers to move from like a worker mindset to like a owner mindset, where you're taking ownership for the actions, not just of yourself, but for that of the team members that you lead. And so, something that actually turns them into a culture protector, something that turns them into that culture protector who understand that standard, that the standards of the organization is a requirement for the business to thrive. Because if the business doesn't have standards, operational standards, then it's not going to thrive. It is just going to be there, and you may be barely surviving, but it's not going to be thriving. So let's explore how, the MVP framework could be that solution. So let's talk about that. Let's see how that works. So mindset, beliefs. So mindset is your beliefs in this instance. So we want to shift the belief that the standard is essential to the brand. And so if a manager views a rule as a chore, then they will drop it when things get busy. They will drop that standard when they feel like it's not necessary. And so for a standard to hold, for that standard to hold up, the leader must deeply believe it is essential to the brand's success. So, for example, we go back to the chewing of the gum and the not chewing of the gum. So we have the supervisor who give the team members gums to chew, and we have the assistant manager who says, no, we can't do that because that's not professional. We can't be giving them gum to chew in front of the clients. Even, so we can't do that because that looks very unprofessional. That's not upholding the brand. That's not upholding how we look. And so if a manager views, that uniform policy, that policy or a professional conduct rule as it's like a chore, then what's going to happen is that they're going to stop enforcing it. They're going to stop enforcing it, as we see in that example. And so the shift here is that that leader needs to believe that the standard is essential to the brand at all times. It doesn't matter who is leading. It doesn't matter who is on shift. It doesn't matter who is working. The standard is always essential across the board. It doesn't matter if the leader and the team members are friends or not friends. It doesn't matter. The standard is essential right across the board. And that's a mindset shift that needs to happen in order for it to connect, for them to convert, for that to be a solution. Now let's talk about vision. Flexibility. This is the context. And so the vision requires clarity to prioritize the business needs without compromising the core standards. So both managers need to see that, hey, it's prioritizing the standards, the core standards of the business. And we're not going to compromise on that. So it's understanding that there is a broader impact on how the team represents the brand. So it's not just me, myself, and I. It's how do we as a team represents the brand. And so the shift here, the mindset or the vision shift here is, prioritizing the business needs. It's not just saying something and not following through, but prioritizing the business needs. And so the third part of how the MVP framework could be the solution is that performance now becomes execution. So we have shifted the mindset. Now we have seen the vision. We are flexible in our approach, not to the point where we are going to negotiate or compromise on the standard, on the core standard of the brand of the business that we are in. But we are going to represent, we're going to see how, we're going to understand how does the decisions that we make as leaders impact the or represents the brand. How do those decisions impact the brand? How do they impact the team as a whole as well? And so now performance, the third aspect of the framework is performance, execution. So this is where follow through becomes paramount. It ensures that, so when we talk about performance and execution and focus, it ensures that leadership decisions are not just, the thoughts that we like. So we don't go into a meeting and we share thoughts that we like, and then there is no follow through. The follow through comes out on how we implement on the floor every single day. How do we show up as leaders? How do we show up in the context of what we said in our meeting? How is that showing up when we go out to lead the team members? How does that show? Because it ensures that leadership decisions are not, the thoughts that we like, but it is actually how we move. So execution, the shift is execution, and consistent execution of the same thing, the same standards, not differing on who is on duty, who is not on duty, not differing, I like you or I don't like you, or my perception, let's put it that way, or my perception of you is X and my perception of you is Y. But we are executing because decisions is the hallmark. Decision is the key. We're doing this in a particular way. The standard is what we are upholding. So we are upholding a particular standard for the organization. It's not just looking at the mission statement and leaving it there. It's not just saying it in the meetings and leaving it there, but we are executing consistently on those standards and ensuring that we uphold them. Because in the last session, we actually talked about the decision lanes. We talked about the decision framework within the MVP framework of how we can make decisions, or the law of decision. So it ties back to the law of consistency. So we are making decisions consistently in accordance with the core standards that we are consistently working on developing and delivering and executing every single time. Again, it doesn't matter who is on duty, who is not on duty. And so we talked about the 3 lanes of decision and how do these support the law of consistency. We talk about the green lane. Right, we talked about the green lane last time. So let's talk about how we define the lanes. So the green lane is where managers can decide and execute decisions alone. So they don't need, the HR director or the senior HR director or operations director on this one. The senior supervisor, the assistant manager, they can make decisions without needing permission from their higher ups. And so these are decisions that will not have, adverse impact on the organization. They're not irreversible. They won't have adverse impact. So these are, low cost, let's put it that way, low cost decisions. Now we have the yellow lane. So the manager decide and then they inform their leaders. So they decide and inform. So the first one is decide and execute. The second one is decide and inform. So you make the decision, but you also inform, you update the leader, that you have made this particular decision. So this is where you have decisions that can be a little bit more impactful on the bottom line, but they are not irreversible decisions. And then we have the red lane. This is where, it's at a higher risk. It is legal issues. It is, issues that will definitely cause the brand to tank, so to speak. And so these issues are high risk. So when you reach the red lane, you escalate. And so these provide the guardrails. So these lanes provide guardrails that allow managers to operate from the same playbook. So all of the leaders will make decision based on the lanes that they find themselves in on any particular day and season. So you have a green lane, it's decide and execute. It's not going to impact the bottom line adversely. The yellow lane, caution. Can we do this? Is this in my wheelhouse? Is this in my scope of authority to decide? So yes, I can decide, then inform. Red lane, well, this is stop. Is this going to impact the brand negatively? Will this cause, legal implications? If yes, then it's time for me to escalate that kind of decision and allow persons in higher authority to make those decisions. So those automatically come back to the law of consistency on how managers show up, how managers deal with not just the standards, but they also how do they make decisions on a standard level. And so they are operating. So we are all as leaders operating from the same playbook. I am not operating from one and somebody else is operating from another. We are all operating from the same playbook. And so let's talk about how this how does this look in strategic principle? And so as we said, a standard you can't enforce will eventually become a suggestion. What does this look like? This is the foundation of leadership longevity. So enforcement shouldn't be seen as mean and as rigid, but what enforcement of these standards do for the culture, for the organization, for everyone involved, is that it acts as a protective gear. It acts as a protective element. Those guardrails, we can go quickly, we can go with confidence. And so it's about protecting your team's limited energy and the professional integrity as well of the brand. And so when you allow a standard to become a suggestion, what is happening is that you're actually choosing a future conflict and much heavier leadership experience. So there will always be conflict happening because now, again, we are training our team members to shop for the easier answer, which supervisor or which manager should I cling to more because they are more lenient, they're more flexible. And so protecting the standard is the only way to protect the team from exhaustion and inconsistency. This is how we're going to protect ourselves and our teams from exhaustion, from inconsistency. And so we make decisions based on those three lanes. We make decisions based on having a standard for not just one set of persons, but for everybody within the context of the organization. How do we choose? Why do we choose consistency? Well, again, consistency, it is about protection and efficiency. Inconsistency it boils down to exhaustion. We getting burnout, leaders getting burnout, team members getting burnout, and conflict. So there's always conflict, you know. And so, again, everything that we have discussed thus far leads back to the law of consistency, the practice of maintaining, you know, a uniformity of standards across all levels of management to ensure that there is operational stability and cultural stability. The consistency becomes your shield, that it actually prevents your managers from having to revisit again the same rules, having the same conversation week after week, month after month, and nothing is changing. And so as we wind down, I want us to reflect. I want us to reflect and want to ask you this question as you reflect. Is your leadership team reacting to situations as they happen? Or are they operating from a shared playbook of core beliefs? Do they all believe the same thing? Are they operating from that core playbook? Because the thing is, when we actually operate from that core playbook and we choose consistency, we actually choose efficiency. And so when we choose a culture that doesn't look good on just a mission statement, as I've said before, as I've iterated before, but we perform that with precision, the small moments, every day is a small moment. Every decision that happens, the inconsistent decisions that happen, it actually causes conflict, it actually causes exhaustion, it actually erodes the bottom line. But when we choose, the consistency, it leads to the brand having a protection. It leads to the business improving its bottom line. And so it protects not only the leader's energy or the immediate manager's energy, which is the first time and or mid-level manager's energy, but it also protects the energy of the team, and it also protects the energy of the senior directors, because they won't have to be called to these meetings on a regular basis. They are using up their time more efficiently and effectively. And so, again, I want to say thank you for joining and to listening to this conversation today as we talk about, the law of consistency, building a culture. We're building a culture through consistency. Why standard shapes culture and results. And so we lead with consistency. We stop again revisiting the rules and we start operating from a shared place. And so, again, thank you so much for joining today. We appreciate you taking the time out to be here and for watching. Thank you for joining live. Those who join live on LinkedIn, those who are watching the replay, let us know what were your biggest takeaways. Let us know, as you reflected on the questions that were asked, is your leadership team reacting to situations as they happen, or are they, operating from a shared playbook of core beliefs where everybody is choosing consistency because they want to choose efficiency as managers so that they reduce burnout both in themselves, their immediate leaders, as well as the team that they supervise. So it's all around. So it's not just reducing burnout for themselves, but reducing burnout for those who they lead and reducing burnout for those who they report into. And so if this helped you in any way, shape, or form, let us know in the comments. And again, subscribe to our weekly leadership conversations. We have these conversations every week, as much as is possible. On a Thursday at 12 noon, we have these conversations at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let us know in the comments, What were your takeaways? What jumped out? What stood out to you in this conversation? And ask question. If you have questions, leave your questions in the comments and we'll come back to answer those questions, and let's connect with each other in the comments as well. And so for HR, if you are an HR, learning and development, or talent management leader, we're hosting the Leaders Lunchtime Roundtable on February 27th. So go ahead and comment lunchtime or send me a direct message with the word lunchtime, and I will add you to the wait list for this exclusive Zoom event. This is an exclusive Zoom event for HR, learning and development, and talent management leaders. If you're in that space, go ahead, either send that direct message or comment on the chat on this program, and I will send you the information for that exclusive Zoom event on February 27th. It's going to be at 12 noon. That's why we call it lunchtime roundtable for leaders. And for if you are a first time or mid-level manager and you have watched to the end, we have something special for you as well. We have the MVP First Time Manager Survival Guide. It is available for download. Go ahead and click the link in the featured section of my profile and get your copy. It's not just it is a resource that you can use not just for 30 days, but you can use it right throughout your management, your leadership journey, because it gives you prompts that you can go back to every single day. And finally, remember, leadership gets lighter when decisions have a home. And I'm going to see you next week, Thursday, for the final episode in this 3-part series of the Manager Efficiency series, where we will look at the law of alignment. So we're closing out this series with the law of alignment. And remember, MVP confidence is currency. So see you next week. Bye for now.